Well, great. Well, I want to try and be mindful of everybody's time and my time here with my co-presenters. And we have hopefully saved enough time for questions and answers and maybe getting to know and have a really good discussion towards the end of our individual presentations. And we're each going to just talk about our experience with the well-being and then that would give us enough time for Q&As. So my name is Kara Perry, and for 22 years, I was a corporate attorney, mainly focused on transactional work and quote unquote, negotiating complex contracts in the healthcare industry. For 14 years, I was in-house at a pharmaceutical company. And in 2020, I left that position with much gratitude. But I became a yoga teacher, a laughter yoga leader, and I became a coach for a personal design program that I myself went and completed in 2020. And I really never intended on going back to the law. And then I just started thinking, was there any way to bring this consciousness and some of the well-being that I was doing for myself and self-reflection to the practice of law? And I Googled conscious lawyering, and that sent me to finding the integrative law movement, J. Kim Wright, and the conscious contract process. And it has been an amazing journey for me. And that also, I met Dean Cass and the negotiation clinic at Quinnipiac and the great work that's being done there. So that's a little bit about my background. And then in case you didn't catch yesterday on the integrative law movement, I just wanted to give a really brief background about the integrative law movement. But the well-being aspect is absolutely grounded in the entire movement. And the integrative law movement, it's a global movement that really seeks to bring dignity to every stakeholder in the legal system. And there's really 4 basic pillars. Integrative lawyers tend to be very reflective, both personally reflective, and they also bring that self-reflection to their work that they do with their clients, and really trying to humanize the law. And part of that self-reflection is really looking at your values and those intrinsic values, as opposed to the extrinsic values that we sort of pick up along the way, both in law school and even before law school. So values like empathy and compassion and dare I say even love, and allow those to really be the North Star that guides your decisions and guides how you practice and really bring your whole self to your practice. And integrative lawyers and the integrative law movement is really systems-based. So integrative lawyers see themselves as really interconnected to all beings, to the earth, and to each other in the legal system. And while it's really understanding that there's a complexity and our world is getting more and more complex, there's this real desire to make the legal system a lot more accessible to people, and to really see that even little incremental change can have a really big and positive effect. And then there's this shifting worldview. So we like to say paradigm shift. So really moving from that adversarial system to a more collaborative approach, and not necessarily getting rid of everything from the old system. So we want to keep the things that are good. I mean, before we had our legal system, we used to settle conflicts and things through duels and things like that. So there's certainly aspects of our system that we want to keep, but we want to bring a lot of other disciplines. So we're looking at, bringing positive psychology and bringing the well-being aspects and bringing the wisdom of ancient practices like meditation together with the neuroscience behind that on how that can help us to be better lawyers, dare I say better people, and really create this paradigm shift. I know that my presenters also have this slide, so I'm going to go really quickly through it, but it's a great slide, I think, to show just what an integrative lawyer, the skill sets. And oftentimes, I mean, I didn't know I was an integrative lawyer, but really it's sort of how I practiced, which kind of made me feel a little bit like out of place sometimes in the approach that I took to negotiations, the approach that I took to really having personal connection relationships. Sometimes didn't feel like that's the way a lawyer should be. So I felt like a fish out of water. When, really a lot of these skills are skills that really help us to practice and to counsel our clients even better. So a lot of times you don't know that you're an integrative, or maybe you don't use the term, but you are really you're really an integrative lawyer using these skills. And the well-being aspect, which is what we're here to talk about today, is really grounded in both these interpersonal and the intrapersonal skills. And we don't want to forget, obviously, the knowledge base. We need that knowledge base. We need that left brain. We need those skills. But it's the idea of, getting into that Venn diagram, into that middle where we can combine them all so that we can show up as a whole person. And then we can practice and serve our clients as the whole people that they are. So I'm going to quickly talk about the negotiation clinic at Quinnipiac, where I have had the absolute privilege to both be a well-being mentor with Mike and Heather, as well as two other well-being mentors last semester. And then past semester, I've had the privilege to teach the clinic. And so a little bit of what we're teaching here. So the negotiation clinic is based on the integrative law approach to negotiations, which is really based on a conscious contract process. And that includes a mindset shift from that adversarial mentality really to that more collaborative approach where we're really focused on the parties' relationships. And through that, we're teaching students about the negotiation process where we can build trust, where we can not only, where we have the students as well as their clients examine their individual vision, mission, and their values. And then we have them work with their clients to really align those visions, mission, and values so they can build that trust before they dive right into negotiating or the terms and agreement. And from that, rather than coming from a fear-based approach to negotiating, this fear-based approach that really our legal system is very much based on, and our legal education system is very much based on, where we're really trying to predict and protect our clients. This allows our clients and their relationship to more sense and respond to change and conflict, which is inevitable in any relationship. And we do that process through a really personalized dispute resolution that really requires a lot of self-reflection on how individuals handle conflict. And then we also, this is where a lot of well-being and contemplative practices come into play, where we're working with students on really trying to use their entire brain. So not just that left brain, that logical thinking, but also to bring in the right brain and really use that to help them creatively solve conflicts. And then we're teaching these leadership skills, a lot of them based on empathy and vulnerability that I think have been really pillars of good leadership, but just don't get talked about as much. And through the well-being pods and the well-being mentors that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, we're really trying to create more of a sense of community and the connectedness in this law school environment that otherwise is somewhat of a competitive vortex. This is the conscious contract process. I'm not going to go into the slide. If anybody wants more information on the conscious contract, say that fast 10 times, process, I'm happy to talk to you about the process. But the whole process really combines this idea of, like I said, examining your vision, mission, and values, getting those aligned doing a lot of self-reflection on how you operate, how you interact with people, how you work best, how you handle conflict, so that you then can create that personalized conflict resolution process. And a design element, a student actually created this. So design element, plain language is also part of that process. So the Wellbeing Mentor Program. So last semester, what we did was I had the opportunity to teach the clinic in 2021 as an apprentice teacher, and in the summer of 2021. And so the clinic has gone through several iterations since it started in 2020. Well-being has always been a foundation of the integrative law movement, of the conscious contract process, and of the clinic. But last semester, we had a simulation course where the students took a course to really get exposed to the principles and the conscious contract process. And in that semester, for the first time, we did well-being mentors, and we created well-being pods. And so I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but just a bit of the evolution of the clinic was having that for the first time last semester. And we had 5 well-being experts, and they were volunteers, work with the students. So some of the features of the clinic that we're really looking to integrate. So to integrate well-being into the core of the curriculum, and to make it really part of students' lives, their daily lives. So some of these are features that are not necessarily separate for this clinic, but some of them we think that really help bring that well-being aspect for students. It is a virtual clinic. The professors, we are not in Connecticut, and we bring a lot of integrative lawyers in as speakers to really talk to the students about their experience, about how they integrate being an integrative lawyer in their practice from all different types of practice, and also how they integrate well-being into their lives. We used check-ins at every class, and the idea there is to really see how students are showing up as a whole person. It's Dean Brown's at Quinnipiac, foundation is really teaching and educating the whole person. And so we use these check-ins to know how students arrive at the space. And it's not really a time to coach the students on anything, but just to sit and hold that space. And rather than just asking them, how are you feeling today? Which you usually get people talking about the work that they're doing, or, all the assignments they have. We do a PIES check-in. And so we ask students to share how they're feeling physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. And that just gives us a better sense of where they are that day in the space. We created student firms to really work on that collaborative approach to the negotiation, and allow them to practice those intrapersonal skills. We use journals, we use a wheel of life, and we use self and peer evaluations really to assist them and allow them to have this self-reflective time. And I'll go into those a little bit more detail. As I said, we had 5 well-being mentors last semester in the fall, and students were broken up into pods of about 3 to 5 students with each mentor. And from there, they created well-being plans, and last semester we used a habit tracker, which I'm going to go into those details. So well-being toolkit. So I'm just going to talk a bit about my experience as a well-being mentor that first semester, and how I explain things to students. So for me, I was trying to explain to them that the tools that I was providing them and the tools that we were talking about and encourage them to use were somewhat like the tools in your house, right? Sometimes some tools you use every day, like your coffee maker, and then some tools are more like your fire extinguisher, where you just need an emergency. But all of them are a way really trying to encourage students to really integrate them into their daily lives, which we know is difficult, to kind of put that well-being, put that self-care as important as all the other demands on their lives. The idea being, though, to encourage them to do that so that as we know, if we don't take time for our wellness, then oftentimes you're forced to take time for your illness. And students did see that and observe that during the semester. And the concept being, these tools are not going to necessarily make law school any less stressful. In some ways, law school is a very stressful environment, and the practice of law is also very stressful. But the idea and the concept that I try and explain is I see them like the windshield wipers on your car. When the storm comes, it's not going to change the storm, but hopefully by having these tools, by having those windshield wipers, you can sort of see down the road a little bit farther and help you get through the storm. So we covered a variety of topics in the well-being pods. Each well-being mentor, we were following these topics for that week, which generally correlated to something substantive that the students were learning in the simulation course. But each mentor had a lot of freedom to really design the 1 hour that they had with the students each week, how they wanted to do it, just based on these topics. And so for me, in my well-being pod, given my background as a yoga teacher and a laughter yoga leader, and the things that really helped me with my well-being and my mental health, we focused a lot on contemplative practices. I would generally start each session with, we would do a breathing exercise. We would do a small meditation. And then we would generally move into discussions on the topics where students would share, their ideas and their concepts of the different topics. And then we'd share some tools that the students might have tried before. And then I would always leave them with 3 tools to try that week. One was something that was physical. One was usually something for their heart or their emotional well-being. And then one that was generally something for a mindset shift practice. We did the meditation, the breathing, we did yoga. They tried laughter yoga, and I have to give them credit. They came with their curiosity. They had their cameras on, and they did try it. I don't know that any of them have continued with it, but they really did come with curiosity. And then we also did a variety of different mindfulness exercises, even simple things like mindful eating. We did an exercise with their favorite candy that they all seemed to enjoy. And then these were some of the yoga moves. Just kidding, we didn't do these yoga moves. But I like to try and bring a little humor into everything that we did too. And so just gonna see if this works. Tell me if you can see, is that working? Oh, yeah. So this is an example of a well-being plan. At the end of the semester, the students were required to submit a well-being plan. And basically it was for them to really examine, explore, and discuss what worked and what didn't work for them, and to come up with a plan going forward, whether that was to continue in law school or continue beyond. This student who gave us the consent to share this with you did hers in a design feature is a big feature of the conscious contract process, and really allowing themselves to express themselves if they have sort of that artistic background is really encouraged. And Emily, Emily went above and beyond with her video of it. And these are just some things that she found helpful for her. She was a yogi. She was open to meditation, but the breathing exercises tended to be things that students really enjoyed. I think the simplicity of it in some ways, it was really accessible. Those were the breathing exercises were things that they said that they could do and found that they could do throughout their day and really integrate into their daily habits. let this just continue a little bit. So this was one of those mindset shift concepts that we talked about on the tale of two wolves. We practiced a lion's breath, which is can be a bit awkward and uncomfortable. Again, they really came with their curiosity and allowed themselves to explore that. It just happened to be one of the students' favorite one. From the well-being plans, when they were required to hand those in, the students that continued on with the clinic, the way that we tried to integrate the well-being into the clinic was we asked them, we used a habit tracker, and asked them to pick about 3 or 4 things to practice throughout the semester. I'm going to probably just stop this now so we can move forward since we started a little bit later. Oh, there we go. And the concept being, it's really, we find sometimes really hard to integrate, right? To integrate these practices into our daily lives. And part of it is we just really, we're never taught about how habits are built or how they affect our lives, how they just come about. And habits they're habits because we're on autopilot when we do them. And generally our minds, right, they're looking for the easiest way to make things simpler and faster for us. And sometimes that can develop into maybe bad habits or habits that we don't necessarily want, because our mind really resists anything that's too difficult. So we talked a lot about when you want to start a new habit, a self-care habit, something for your well-being, it's helpful to start small. So if that's meditation, maybe it's just a few minutes a day. And then we talked about stacking. So stacking a habit onto a habit that you already have can make it easier for that to become more on that autopilot to make it actually a habit. So things like after you brush your teeth, maybe that's when you do your meditation. So we had a lot of discussion on habits and trying to really provide them tools to integrate it. This was the habit tracker that students used, and they weren't graded on the habit tracker. It was just that they turned it in each week. And in this part, in the clinic, we used the well-being mentors from last semester as mentors also. So there was one-on-one mentoring in the clinic. And we also used it as accountability. So the habit tracker was used as an internal accountability, so that students were accountable sort of to themselves. And then when they would meet with their well-being mentors, they could talk about their habits and how those were going. And it was simple things like, drinking a certain amount of water, or getting to bed at a certain time, or making your bed first thing in the morning, which was something like, at least there was that little bit of a win to kind of help your mindset for the day. And while I thought that students would find this to be just one more thing to do, I mean, in addition to their journals or other kind of paperwork things they had to do, many of the students actually didn't seem to mind this too much. This didn't seem to be that wasn't the complaint about the habit trackers. So, and sometimes they would express how they saw, really what it does is it helps them to really sort of just measure. We sometimes can't change things that we can't measure. And so it helped them to kind of see during those times, maybe when they were, that under a lot of stress, maybe it was exams and they didn't do their meditation or whatever those habits, those well-being, those self-care habits that they chose, they could see that those were times when they sometimes got sick or they didn't feel great, or when they did go to the gym or when they did whatever habits, those are when they felt better. So it's just another tool to help them sort of have that visual and have them be able to sort of to look back and to also help them to integrate it into their daily lives. This is the Wheel of Life that we used, and we had students complete this 3 times during the semester. both in the simulation course in the fall and in the spring. And the Wheel of Life it's really a self-reflective tool that really just captures where you are in these 8 categories of your life in that moment in time. And again, it's just one of those tools to use to see, maybe where you might want to put a little more attention if something is sort of, on your wheel scores lower. And it might just be somewhere that you want to make a change or a shift, and helps you just see in that moment in time where you stand on those 8 categories. And just really quickly, because I'm running on my time, there's still, and I'm really interested in having a discussion of this in the question and answer part, or our discussion part. There's challenges with incorporating well-being. It's not an easy thing necessarily to do, even as important as it is. And some of the challenges that we faced were sometimes it's difficult to do that self-reflective work. Oftentimes it's not something that we've been taught to do, or asked to do, or shown how to do. And when you really have to sit and start to do that, it can bring up a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. And so sometimes that becomes a difficult process. Learning to embrace that mindset shift from that adversarial to more that collaborative can be difficult when you're in a law school setting that not every professor or class that you're taking really supports that necessarily. And then there's this idea of viewing that well-being and success, however you define that, as mutually exclusive, as that there will be time to do that later, but right now I've got to focus on getting that A or getting that paper done or whatever the pressure is. And then the flip side, there's sometimes this misconception that because of the heavy emphasis on well-being, that maybe it means that it's not quite as rigorous as other classes, that you can sort of get a pass in the class, which isn't the case, although we are very much interested in issues that come up that students are wrestling with or dealing with during the semester, and happy and willing to talk to students about it. And then I think this is just an overall difficulty for our profession in general, is really asking for help and seeking that help when you need it. Again, I think that's just something with our profession that we all sort of struggle with. And then I will save that for later, and then I will stop sharing and turn it over to Mike. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Kara. All right, let me just share my slides. Get those up here. There we go. All right, so it's nice to meet / see everyone, or at least see your names, for those of you not on camera. But my name is Mike Kasdan. I also participated in the same class, and I'm really happy to be here today. And thank you all for coming and sharing some time with us on this topic. I am a practicing lawyer. I'm a partner at Wigan and Dana. I do intellectual property law. I also started this project called Lawyering While Human last year, after having kind of my own personal experience with some mental health issues. And so, I think like years 0 through 35 of my life didn't ever talk about, have in mind anything about mental health and well-being. And so I'm kind of making up for lost time a little bit now. I come at this from a little bit of a different angle than Kara. I am, I used to be like, mindfulness is not for me. I'm a multitasker. I used to kind of resist, I think, a lot of these personal techniques that that I've now integrated some into my lives. And so I'm really focused on trying to spread this message as an important like leadership and professional development and life skill. And I, came upon Professor Wright and Kara and Heather and Carolyn and this whole group during a time when I was, actually took a leave of absence from my job for the first time in my career, and was wondering whether my brain was telling me to not be a lawyer anymore. And I was looking around and kind of found this community of people talking about these issues. And now I feel like I'm like 50% intellectual property, metaverse, AI, and 50% mental health and well-being. So I want to acknowledge that speaking about these topics, and especially having a class, that dedicated class time to talking about these topics in a weekly, continuous way, was, I think, for me, a very unique experience. It certainly wasn't anything I had in law school or in life. And it was a really wonderful experience as a mentor. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do it. But also, a lot of what I do right now is I'm going out into law schools, I'm speaking at law firms and conferences and podcasts and whatever. And this is a topic that people aren't used to talking about, especially in the workplace, right? I come from a generation or, one generation removed from this is our private personal stuff. Why would we share anything about this? It's weakness to talk about it, right? All that sort of stuff. So I do want to acknowledge that at the outset. I stole Kara's slide because for me, when I met Professor Wright, the integrative model was really new to me. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And maybe in some way I'm an integrative lawyer in training or have aspects of this. But to me, what was super interesting about this slide was this part, was just the extreme overlap with topics that relate to mental health and well-being, which I've shaded in blue. So I just thought it was interesting that so much of the Venn diagram and the bullets and so much of what makes someone an integrative lawyer, and I actually think, even just a lawyer, it's actually such a critical, part of what we do. And I think, at least we used to call a lot of these things soft skills, right? And we used to not teach them. And I recognize as I've sort of gotten older and grown up that like these are the skills that differentiate leaders. These are the skills that differentiate kind of the dime a dozen folks from people who have impact, right? Being able to have emotional intelligence, being able to have boundaries, like all of this translates into the working world, of course. So I just thought that was interesting. Very quickly, just about my experience as a mentor. And I know Kara had put some of these up. But yeah, while conscious contracts was being discussed in class and they were doing, all the exercises, including some that Kara showed, on a weekly basis. So for my pod, the four of us would meet every Friday, over Zoom, and we'd have a weekly topic. And I thought one really successful aspect of it was how different the different mentors, how differently the different mentors did this. We had a lot of freedom to kind of do whatever we wanted, right? Like, and so some people, assigned readings, and some people did exercises in class, and for me, like my approach to this was really like using this to just share personal stories, like myself, the students, and really for each of these topics, saying like, why are we talking about this topic? And does this topic relate to your daily life as a law student or as a lawyer, and how? And I think that ended up being a really interesting way of doing it. I saw that over time, like we were meeting in small groups, we got to know each other over time by sort of sharing things about ourselves. And I thought it was really impactful. I got a lot out of it, and I think the students did too. And I think I was also able to share a lot of the things I learned on a lot of these topics, because I have to say that as an associate and as a younger person, like all my instincts were wrong. And as a partner and as an older person, like I appreciate that now. For example, week 9, communication, right? When I was an associate and a partner gave me something to do, I would just do it. And, I would say, when do you need it by? And they would say, this tomorrow. and I wouldn't say, I don't really quite understand what you're talking about, or like, how should I do that? Or, hey, it's my wife's birthday tonight. Do you really need it by tomorrow? And I think that was kind of not good. And now, as a partner, when I work with associates who are great, I would rather them communicate to me and say, hey, when do you really need it by? Because I have this other thing, rather than burning out and getting angry at me and doing a bad job, and then I have to do it in the first place at the end, and everyone kind of loses. So I just think, like, talking about how these topics integrate with the world and why are we even talking about this in the first place, I think is really important, because I think in most spaces, there's going to be resistance to this kind of thing, right? When I talk about mindfulness, there's always some guy in the front who's like, I'm a litigator and I've been a litigator for 40 years. And so I can't do mindfulness. And I'm like, well, I'm also a litigator, and actually you can. And I think it actually makes you a better litigator. So I think thinking through like why this is important in the business case for this is some of what I talk about. So the rest of my presentation, I just want to sort of talk about that issue, and I think what we can do kind of out in the world, in law firms and in legal organizations, because I also think that young folks have a really important leadership role that they can play in designing a more sustainable culture. Because when I look around, especially in the well-being movement, there aren't too many people who are still practicing lawyers, and I understand the reason for that. And I also understand that this is sort of an institutional issue, and that institutional issues persist for, in our culture for a lot of reasons. They're pernicious, and that it's going to take some doing to change it. But, just in terms of, I'm not going to make you guys type in the chat just because we're not going to do that right now. But, the point of this is everyone's got good days, bad days. Everyone's kind of riding the roller coaster of life, right? Past 2 weeks have been really hard for me. My dad's been in the hospital. I have been, my attention has been there. It has affected me in the workplace because there's not perfect dividing line, like some sort of work-life balance where there's a work life and a home life. And I think, we benefit by kind of knowing that, and recognizing that and acknowledging that. And I think we also tend to think about mental health as sort of talking about clinical things like depression and anxiety or PTSD. But really, I'm talking about it, and I think we're all talking about it in a much broader sense. And I think when you talk about it in a broader sense, you recognize that it impacts everyone all the time. It cuts through everything we do in the workplace and in the world, right? It's like recruiting and retention and doing good work for clients, and all these issues, are impacted by this issue. So why are we talking about well-being? We are all super familiar with the statistics. The statistics are terrible in terms of the legal field. We can talk about why that is. They're terrible after the pandemic, during the pandemic, before the pandemic, at any point in time that you've ever surveyed lawyers about this. I have the statistics in here. I'll zoom through those slides, but one of the things I found sort of more effective in conveying the same issue are memes, because I've got college-age kids, and I joined Instagram to keep an eye on them. And there are actually some pretty good legal accounts on Instagram. And I think that they really hold sort of profound truths because they're funny, but they're also like, wow, that's kind of real. And I think that they convey the same message that we get from looking at the statistics, right? And the messages are that we've got kind of a cultural issue. We could talk about it in our general culture, but I think especially in the law. And it's a cultural issue to the point where people, they wear busyness and lack of boundaries almost as like a badge of honor. And you kind of see it everywhere, right? And, one point is that like we create cultures and leaders create culture. Different places have different culture. And, when I first told my siblings, who I'm really close with, that I was going to start this lawyering while human thing and talk about doing it a different way, they were both like, well, that's never going to happen. Like, it's kind of a hazing model. It works. Like, you suffer when you're young and then you get to bully people around and everyone makes lots of money. but I just don't think it's sustainable. And I've seen it. Like, I've been a paralegal, I've been an associate, I've been in-house, I've been a partner. And I think we can still do this work and do it more sustainably. And so that's why we're talking about it. Of course, there are endless memes, and I'm sad that Succession ended, but it did. But I think it's worth paying attention to, because I think these are sort of conveying some truths that we know. The statistics, like I said, been bad. It was bad before the pandemic. It was bad during the pandemic. It's bad now. In fact, American Lawyer Survey just came out and said, and even though everyone's talking about this more, the statistics have actually gotten a little bit worse year over year. And, part of that might be, more awareness and more talking about these things we never used to talk about. But, we've got an issue, and it needs addressing. So one thing on this is stress, and because I know Kara mentioned, we're not going to solve or eliminate stress. Stress is something that exists in life. But I think we can undo workplaces and environments that actually add to the already existing stress. This was a survey that came out pretty recently, a couple months ago, on suicidality, and the link between that and stress. And it's not rocket science. It's not surprising, but 22 times as likely is, I think, pretty shocking. And I think about, how much stress is created by people, by managers, where we can create environments that I think that take a more integrative approach and actually are kind of better for everyone. So I think about that a lot. I talked about a little bit about why I'm here. I experienced depression for the first time in 2010. And before that, had never thought about it, talked about it. So it came as quite a shock. It was incredibly acute. It was right after I made partner at a prior law firm I was at. I was a couple years from, but the writing was on the wall that I was going to get divorced. There was just a lot going on, home life and work life at the same time, and it exceeded this threshold that I just didn't really know I had, but of course everyone does. And so that's kind of why I'm doing this and why I'm here talking about this. So I think a lot of this is, and that's why the more I learn about the integrative movement, the more I like it. A lot of it is really like reconnecting to our humanity, which really shouldn't be hard because after all, like, we're all humans. It seems like it should be easy to, but in stressful situations and workplaces, we tend to do things, that we think are called for, and maybe put ourselves last or don't have boundaries, and that humanity sometimes gets lost if we're not really intentional about it. I talk a lot about why I think this is much more than an individual issue. I think that individual techniques I've learned the hard way are actually useful, and different techniques apply to different people. Like gratitude, I find very powerful. Like journaling, I find powerful. Mindfulness practice, I don't do it in a meditative yoga kind of way, but I have adopted mindfulness type thinking, and it's really made a big difference for me. But I think if we're just talking about the individual level, and institutions don't change, then we're not going to get change. So we need to focus on our institutions. And I think, this really is an institutional, organizational, cultural issue. Thinking about, do we have environments, workplaces where the folks whose brains we are recruiting and selling, or we're optimizing that so people are taking care of each other and doing the best possible work. And I really think it's a leadership issue. And I've seen this, every place has people who have power who say, in my day, we didn't really talk about all this stuff, and this is just lazy, and people just want to work less. And the best way to be a good lawyer is to do lots of lawyering and bill lots of hours. And so that has to be navigated. I think that part of how you navigate that is to show that there's a business case to do so. And that's, part of what I'm out here talking about. And I think, your generation, the younger generation, which is the talent that folks are recruiting, which is the future of the profession, does a much better job with this issue, valuing this issue, navigating it, emphasizing the importance of having work-life balance. And so, it's on us in existing places to sort of foster that. And I think a lot of places are looking for leadership in that space. And so I'm pretty excited about that. I'm going to zoom through the last to make sure I give Heather enough time and that we have time for discussion. But I wrote an article in Thomson Reuters last year on the business case, because I think, different people are going to approach this issue in different ways, depending on where they come from. Right. People who are already saying, being an integrative lawyer is important, and and the balance is important. They're going to come at it from one way, or maybe someone who has personal experience with depression are going to come at it from one direction. The comptroller for the law firm who's 65 and has always done it his way is going to come at it from a different issue, a different angle. So there isn't a lot written on the business case, but I think it's, really obvious. We are selling our brains, and we charge a lot of money for that. And therefore, if we're not taking care of our brains, we're not doing it right. To sum it up, right? So you can look at it both positive and negative. There are now fancy consulting studies right out there that show that workplaces with high levels of mental well-being are more productive, right? So increased productivity. You can also look at the costs, like cost of missing time, cost of being there, but not really being there. Costs when people mess stuff up ethically, or liability. A lot of that comes from mental health issues or related addiction issues. And then also just recruiting, retention, and attrition, right? If we're spending lots of money to recruit the best and brightest, and then spending lots of money to train them, and then we bring them into an environment where they burn out in a year and a half and leave, that's a really crappy business model, right? And that has high costs. So I mentioned a little bit about work-life balance. I was a big fan of Severance. But the point is, and this guy on the right, Sahil Bloom, I found him. He has all sorts of fun charts about who we spend time with at different points in our life, which as a parent was really eye-opening, because I found that in 3 years, my kids are going to take a real nosedive in terms of the amount of time we're going to spend together. And it's terrifying. But the one constant in all of this guy's graphs was the people we spend the most time with are the people at work. And we're spending a lot of time at work, and we spend a lot of time with those people. So I think we best make sure that it's, positive, and treat each other well, and treat each other like human beings, and create atmospheres where we do that. A lot of these, I think, connect to a lot of the tenets of integrative law. This is from the National Task Force on Attorney Wellbeing, and it's the actual World Health Organization definition of well-being. Well-being, well-being is not just not being not mentally well. It's thriving across all of these dimensions, a lot of which we discussed in the pod, like spiritual, intellectual, emotional, social. That's why we care about all these things. And there's a lot here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's worth mentioning that that's what we're shooting for, right? And yeah, that's just a quote. I'll close there are a couple things just on individual things that I think feed into, approach to this, and that are oftentimes not taught. So I'm glad that we're talking about some of them. But, one thing that I learned is when I first got depressed, I thought I was the only person this happened to, and it was super isolating and super lonely. And by the time 5 years later, I got the guts to share it with two of my former colleagues. And I said, this thing happened to me at work where I was not functional. I would come to the office and shut the door, and I couldn't do anything. And then I would wait till 5 o'clock and I would leave. And the next day I would come and there'd be twice as much stuff. And after 3 days, I was exhausted. And they were both oh yeah, that's depression. That's happened to me a whole bunch of times in my career. And I was thinking, well, this would have been useful information to share with me earlier. So that's also, I think, part of what we're doing. But I'm not saying that we all have to go around sharing about our mental health intimately at all times. But I think we have to create atmospheres where if people need help, they can get the help. And where it's not going to be, thought of as some black mark, so people are going to not do it. Right. And I think, this stuff about what I learned in school and what I wish I learned, I think we learned some of that, last year, and I'm really proud of that. It's the first academic setting I can say that I was in where we did talk about learning some of these things, which I think is pretty great. This is a chart. I'll leave people with my slides. I'm happy to send them around, but I stole this from a psychologist, just about self-awareness and like recognizing that we're all going to be navigating and being at different points during different times and learning how to kind of check in with yourself. And then I think once you can check in with yourself, the bottom says like, okay, if you're in the green zone, like you're good, right? If they're yellow, here's some things you could do. And same with orange and red. It kind of gives a little like check in and what do I do when I'm feeling a certain way? And I think, I have to say that for most of my life, I did not have this level of self-awareness. And I think now I'm starting to. So I think it is an important skill because I think once you do it for yourself, you can do it for others around you. And then I think once you can do it for others around you, you can think about like the larger cultural issue. I'm going to skip the individual tips for now, just in the interest of time, and close with this very dark text from a friend of mine and me. Where he was like, you're going to get rid of lawyer jokes. And I was like, yes, let's do that. Because I think, I joke about it and I like sharing memes and I can talk about it with perspective now, but, we are in a crisis level with mental health and well-being in this country and in this profession. So I think it's time that we kind of get after it. And I think that, my experience last year as a mentor through this program, I think was a really a creative and interesting way to start approaching this at the level we have to, which is before people get out into the workforce, and starting to do this at law schools, which we're seeing a little bit more, I think is a great thing. So I'll close with that. If people want to reach out to me or connect with Lawyering While Human, I'm on all those different places. And you can do that, LinkedIn and Twitter and even Instagram. And I now even have a webpage. So you can find me all sorts of different ways. I'm easy to find. But thank you all for your attention. And I will turn it over to Heather, who is batting third.
Thank you, Mike and Kara. Let me get my screen up. Are you seeing my slides?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we all started with the same title slide, but again, I want to talk about how integrative law just really looks at values, systems, and shifting worldviews. And it's also very reflective, which since I left the practice of law, I've become a much more reflective person. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm calling myself now a life and joy catalyst for people who are struggling with grief, identity, and belonging. But I do that through the lens of grief coaching, education, and recovery support. I'm a listening heart with ears for those who lawyers, law students, or professionals who want to turn their pain into powerful productivity. A couple of fun facts about me. I completed my first sprint triathlon last year at the age of 50, and I'm going to be joining Kara in the yoga world because I'm now enrolled in a 200-hour yoga teacher training. So we'll be able to exchange notes. Thank you. Let's see, go to the next slide. And I just want to show this again. Mike and Kara talked about it, but I think it is really a wonderful picture, and we can't look at it enough to start to change the legal profession by default. So in my pod of law students, we always started each session with centering. And most of these slides, I'm going to be talking about what we actually did in our pods for the 14 weeks. It was a weekly check-in. We'd either do 3 cleansing breaths, or we would do 60 seconds of silence. And there would be a prompt while you were thinking for the 60 seconds. We also focused on gratitude. What are you grateful for? And I also listed the pies there, which I also put in the chat as well. But it was a wonderful icebreaker when we all met for the first class, and it is something that I've used in mostly every meeting that I lead now, just to center everyone before we get to the business at hand. But yeah, really focusing on how are you feeling physically? What's going on in your body? How are you feeling intellectually? What's going on in your mind? How are you feeling emotionally? What's your heart saying? And how are you feeling spiritually? What's your source telling you? And your source is whatever that is, even if it's yourself. We started off with some group norms. And I kind of got these from, I am also a grief recovery method specialist. And so some of the things that we set out in front, intentions that we set, there's no judgment, there's no criticism, no analysis. The space is totally confidential and safe. Uniqueness and individuality. Each of us is unique. Each of our experiences are unique. We can't compare because when we do, there's room for other things to come in that don't really need to come into the conversation. But we're also listening hearts with ears. So I'll kind of go through the weekly themes. And the first one was freedom and autonomy. And I kind of did a practical exercise. One of the things I've loved, even when I was a lawyer, is looking up what the definitions of words are. So we always started with the definitions of each word that it was of our theme, because a lot of us come in with different interpretations of what a word means. And so if we can start off on a level playing field and actually give people the information that they may not have been exposed to, it leads to a better conversation. So we did the exercise. I presented the information that's there on the slide about the 3 types of freedom, which I'll share are the freedom from, the freedom to, and the freedom to be. So we kind of just went through and brainstormed these questions. So each week that we met, we were doing self-reflection. So by the end of the 14 weeks, self-reflection was really a part of the student process. And a lot of them actually included it in their well-being plans that they created from what they liked about the 14 weeks. And it also ended it with having the students choose which one actually resonated with them. Did they want to be free or did they want to be autonomous? And the answers were interesting, but it really, I love the way the professors set up the curriculum or the themes that we had each week, because each of them kind of tied to the next week, because you'll see at the bottom of the slide, I said that psychological well-being actually includes autonomy. So we were able to take that into the next week. So the next week was psychological well-being and happiness. And Mike just talked about the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing report. But psychological well-being that's not part of the 6, which is interesting. But I think it's a mix of the emotional well-being that was listed there, which is your heart, the intellectual, which is your mind, and social well-being, which focuses on belonging and inclusion. With respect to the happiness piece, we used the model of Martin Seligman, the Authentic Happiness book, but instead of doing the Authentic Happiness survey, I had the students do the VIA Character Strength Survey, which actually looks at your top 24 strengths. And everything's a strength, but they are ranked. So when you are actually taking aligned action with your top 5, you're usually happier. Your bottom 5, they're still strengths. However, you may not want to spend too much time there if you're in a rush. So it just gave them an opportunity to figure out how they could focus less on emotions and more on engagement. The next one was alignment with purpose and values. And this actually happened on World Mindfulness Day. And so we actually had a special check-in for that particular day. And I asked them, what are you more mindful of today than yesterday? That's what they had to think about in their 60 seconds of silence. So it was pretty interesting what came out. But I provided them a template for a personal vision statement, and we continued it later on in the semester when we talked about future planning and resilience. But we just did the first part, which focused on purpose. And they got to create on purpose what their life would look like, feel like, and be like. And the idea was to take the number of years they've been alive and separate it into thirds. And look at the accomplishments that you've made or the happy events that occurred. And look at what values. I actually presented them with a list of values. So we talked about that and what was important to them, but also to notice whether those values that they had in an earlier third was still present in the later third. And if it changed, what was that? So I asked them to create that. We even took time during the session to create it, and they actually got time to work on it afterwards. But this work came from Dr. Sarah Rice Hecking through True Focus Coaching, and I was a part of her Time Matters program, which helped me with time management, but it was so much more useful than just for time. Emotional intelligence, mental flexibility, and limiting beliefs was the next thing that we talked about. And we started out with our check-in doing a meditation about learning from your emotions that I experienced during my coach training program through Coach Diversity Institute. And we focused on whether emotional intelligence, mental flexibility, and limiting beliefs were skills or a learned behavior. And so I kind of tweaked what the theme was. And not only did I focus on emotional intelligence, but I focused on emotional regulation as well, because I think that is actually more important because, yes, you can have a body of knowledge, but do you know how to use it in the moment? And that is what emotional regulation is. Mental flexibility, I sort of paired that with cognitive agility because, again, you've got to be able to use and shift and think in the moment when these things are happening, when demands are on your time. Limiting beliefs, I really looked at them as disempowering beliefs. And so we looked at what did they think less about themselves in their relationships to others, society, the world, and their morals. So they really had to walk away thinking, it doesn't have to be a learned behavior, but it can be a skill that they can add to their toolkit. The next one was boundaries and habits, and there are subtle differences between the two. There are several types of boundaries there that I listed, but habits are things that we want to get better at or want to accomplish now or sooner, but they require practice. And that was something that really slapped me in the face after I left the law, because I didn't practice anything. I just did it. And so in order to actually become a time master, I had to practice, but I had to create that vision that I shared with the students earlier in order to be able to reverse engineer and figure out what it is that I needed to practice to get better at. The next one was curiosity, self-discovery, and healing. And again, this is another exercise that I got from Dr. Sarah Rice Hacking through Time Master's program, which is True Focus Coaching. But I really looked at it as an identity reset. And I actually presented this, each of the mentors had an opportunity to present not only in front of our mentor pod, but in front of the entire class for 5 minutes during one of the classes. And this is sort of like a life pruning exercise. And I kind of put it, I didn't actually put the document here, but I created it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories. And then what you do is you list your roles in life. Try to figure out if they're meaningful. Ask yourself, are some of the things you're doing still meaningful? Is it something you can ditch? Can you get rid of it? Is it something that is no longer serving you or no longer adds value to you? Can you delegate it to someone else? Some things that we can do, yes, we can do it, but is there someone else who can do it even better and quicker and give us our time back? And then what are the things you can do quickly and easily? a lot of us will go straight to that category, but make sure that it's not something else someone could do. Don't default because, oh, I want to do this, because actually exhibits a bit of control that may not be actually necessary. But again, this helps you to reset your identity, because a lot of times there are things we're doing that we don't need to do that will actually give us time back. The next category or theme for the week was nature, fun, and play. People were a little skeptical, but they played along. And again, this came from Dr. Sarah Reifeck. I really owe a great part of my life, because she just totally changed my life when I learned about time and became a time master in 2019. But nature, a lot of people focused on bringing nature into their offices because, you know, as lawyers, when the students graduate, they will spend a lot of time in their office. And I asked the question, how can you bring the environment into your workspace? Because 80% of our success is predicted by our environment. When I learned that, I was like, whoa, I need to change a lot of things. And when I did, things started to, I felt better, and I had more energy. But you can bring plants or flowers or essential oils and sound baths into your office, and even a yoga mat. Fun and play were usually synonymous for students. They would actually meld the two. It wasn't much different. But what I did was I challenged them to think back to, what did you do as a child that you don't do anymore or that you miss? And it was some very interesting things that came up, but I also challenged them to, and I got this from Dr. Sarah Pecking, which was hard for me at first too. Look at your calendar and put the fun on there first, and then add all the other stuff. Again, they were skeptical, but they actually tried it, and some of them were able to actually still get all of the work that they needed to get done and add fun, which they may not have had or may not have thought they had the space for previously. But when you put it on there first, it's like an incentive to get all the other things done so you can get to the fun. I see a lot going on in the chat. Anything I'm missing? No? Okay. All right. Physical fitness and rest. How do you look, feel, and do your best? Physical fitness is pretty self-explanatory. The benefits are controlled stress. It boosts your immunity, but rest was something totally different. And a lot of people thought it was sleep, but it's actually taking time to rest and recharge. The definition of the word is in the definition. The word is in the definition, but it's two things, rest and recharge, so you can be your best. And actually, there's 3 types of rest. I discovered that while I was researching what we would talk about in the hour. And passive rest is when most lawyers would think that's when you're lazy, but it's not. It's not being lazy. It's you just sitting back and not doing anything, not looking at your phone, maybe reading a book, or just basking in nature. But that is passive rest. Active rest is maybe going kayaking or swimming. You're doing something that's active, but it's still rest because it's giving you energy. And social rest is hanging out with friends, family. That can bring rest to some people, and for others, it's not rest. So, yes, that's just something to think about. Communication and problem solving, that was the next category. And these sort of go hand in hand because communication is a big part of problem solving. You cannot solve a problem without effective communication. And a lot of that is a breakdown between lawyers and their clients, lawyers and other lawyers in the firm, even law students and law professors. So there's various kinds of communication, but really we honed in on and talked about how was their decision making? How did they collaborate? And they were collaborating while they were in the full class, even though this was part of the well-being pod. But all in all, it came down to, what do you need to be an effective human? And what do you need to be an effective leader? Because, as Mike said, we are human first, and then we're lawyers. And I think we start to forget that in law school, and even more so when we become practicing lawyers. Did I share that I was a tax attorney for 14 years? But I don't know that I did that at the beginning, but I left the law in 2017. And I've just been focused on lawyer well-being and coaching and helping people move through their grief. The next week was creativity, art, and culture. And we actually looked at a TED Talk called Why is Art Important? And I put the link there, and I'm happy to share my slides as well. But it talks about how art is the conscience of society, and that it's like a soft power. But it's also freedom. And it also talked about how it impacted culture and our creativity. And we spent the hour after watching the TED Talk, which was about 12 minutes, about how can we be creative as a lawyer, or how can we implement or impact culture as a lawyer. And the creativity piece was all can't even talk. It was already a part of the design of the class, because as Kara talked about, design was a huge part, or is a huge part, of integrative law. Spirituality and mindfulness. Really, that's focused on living a meaningful life connected to core values and morals. And spirituality, a lot of people don't like to sort of talk about that. But again, as I said earlier, it is about who is your source, whatever that is. No one can put you in a box, and that can be yourself. But it unlocks our creativity. We're more optimistic. We are better able to function in relationships. But some ways for spirituality are nature bathing, watching the sunset, reflecting, volunteering, knowing what your life purpose is, and also your values, which we talked about at the beginning of the semester. Mindfulness really helps to improve executive function and self-control, and that self-awareness to help you balance life, because what life is about, moving with the ebbs and flows, and we'll talk about that next, because I think the next one is about flow. But really focusing on gratitude and writing down what you're thankful for, and sitting in that and taking it with you, not just writing it down and leaving it there, but taking it with you throughout the week and reminding yourself to just pause when things are in disarray and think about, what are you grateful for? Or do the pies. But really just stopping when things are in disarray and collecting yourself, if it's only for 60 seconds. It's interesting, when we were doing the centering, I don't think at the beginning of the semester a lot of students were comfortable, but by the end of the semester, everyone loved it. I actually even asked, I surprised them. I would show up and I was like, who's leading the centering today? And so each of the students actually had to lead it. And it was, I don't have children or anything, but it was interesting to see them sort of, I don't think they were mocking me, but it was interesting to see that they were actually saying the same things I was saying. So, it stuck. And it really stuck, because in everyone's well-being plan after the semester, they all said they were going to continue centering, even though it might have been difficult. And one person even said that he tried it outside of class, and he realized that he needed 5 to 10 minutes versus 60 seconds. So it was very instrumental in helping them to be mindful. Future planning and resilience. Again, we continued the personal vision statement, and we really looked at how to visualize the future. Really, like, if you tried your best, you did all the things right, you achieved all your goals, what would your life look like? And we looked at that from a personal lifestyle, and from a professional lifestyle. And I got this also from Dr. Sarah Wright Hecking. And it was amazing to see because you can check in with whether you are on target with this lifestyle or even switch it when you do it quarterly or biannually or annually. But it gives you control and power over your schedule. Resilience. I think people have a wrong definition of resilience because I always hear the term bounce back, bounce back. We never bounce back because even if you stretch a rubber band, it never bounces back to its original elasticity. So what we need to recognize is something has changed and we need to reset what has changed and not try to move forward in as if we weren't stressed. The Harvard Business Review has an article that was written in 2016, and it talks about how resilience is about recharge and not how you endure, which is what I think a lot of people actually think resilience is. But there's a correlation between lack of recovery, which is that pause, and an increased health and safety issues. And there's in that article, it actually talks about how the article was written in 2016, but when I inflated it or increased it for inflation, that's more than $100 billion a year that is spent on health and safety issues because we don't pause and recharge. Acceptance, flow, and gratitude. There is room for all three. And we kind of talked about that once we talked about the definitions. And one of the exercises that we practiced was what's gone well. From week to week, you can actually track your progress and learn to love yourself or accept yourself. That is required for resilience. You have to accept yourself in order to become resilient. Flow is finding contentment and being in a relaxed state. And I just talked about gratitude and focusing on what is good in life. And there were students that actually wanted to include that in their ongoing well-being plan. The last week of class, we focused on completion, celebration, and ceremony. And really that's about the state of being finished for a conclusion to an event. And we talked about the definitions of all three. We talked about the feelings that people were having because we had been together for 14 weeks, meeting for an hour. We had become close. There were people I even asked the question, what emotions are coming up as, this ends? And through my work with the Grief Recovery Institute, there's a completion exercise that helps you to manage and balance those feelings. So what I asked the group was, what positive thoughts and feelings have developed for your cohort members have you developed over the semester? And I asked them to share what those things were. And I also asked, did you share those things with the person? I mean, we were all in the group, and when I asked, well, what do you think about this person? And they would say all these glowing things. But when you ask, had they really shared that with their fellow student, the answer was usually no. And so then I asked, well, what if something happened and you weren't able to say that? Who's left with the undelivered communication or the incomplete relationship if something does happen? So this is an exercise that they can use to get complete with their emotions for anything, not just with relationships with people, but their relationships with anything. And again, something they can use in their career, professionally and personally. So there were 4 law students in my fall class, a fall pod, 3 3Ls and 1 2L. And then in the spring semester, there was one of the students that was in the fall pod who I was his accountability partner, and we had mentorship check-ins during the semester. Takeaways. One important one I will share, because I know we have about 5 minutes left. Because I am a grief coach, one of the students actually chose me because she wanted to talk about grief. And in her well-being plan, she stated that, well, I liked Heather and I picked her because of grief, but she didn't talk about grief. But actually, I did. Every time I talk, I'm talking about grief because I'm talking about how we ebb and flow through change, loss, transition. And that is a great example of you can manage all that happens in your life without using the words that make us shrink from it. Grief is something to be embraced, not run from. And the challenge, I think there's one challenge, is really getting the students to be able to stand alone if they have to bring the well-being practices that we've taught them, and they're the only ones in their firm that are practicing them. That is the biggest challenge and something that I'm passionate about solving. So there's questions. I'm opening it up for questions, and there's my contact information. Thank you for the opportunity to present.